I'm Don Taylor here with Tim Sarchet from Nomadic. Really important topic we've got today, Tim. I'm very much looking forward to chatting. And clearly, from the number of people we have flooding into the room, popular topic as well.
Yeah, looking forward to digging in with you too. For those who are joining a little early, there are a few questions on the screen there. Where are you joining us from today? What's the weather like where you are? And what are you most looking forward to hearing about today? If you put your thoughts in the chat, just to keep things going while we wait to start. We'll start in probably 3 or 4 minutes, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I'm always interested now. I'll let people know, put my answers in the chat. Oh, look, Kurt's straight off the blocks. Calgary, Alberta. Milan, Italy. Robert, I shouldn't say it, but I'm kind of glad it's cold and rainy in Milan, because it's cold and rainy in London. And if it was sunny and lovely in Milan, then I'd be just consumed with jealousy. Although you can see the sunlight coming in, the rain's actually stopped. New Jersey is chilly, as Marion Brittany reports. Pageland, South Carolina, is where she is. Jen's from Orlando. I was there last week. I got the last flight out, Jen, before the hurricane hit. It was very exciting. Federica is in Barcelona. Good to have you here. Diana, Louisville. T. White in Greensboro, North Carolina. Some UK
in
weather.
London with blue skies and white fluffy clouds. I must be in a different part of London, because that's not kind of what it must be coming my way, because another person.
Where are you, Tim?
London is now sunny.
Are you over towards the east?
I'm on the east, yes.
There you go, you see. So it rolls across west to east. So you will get it, don't worry. Kentucky rains.
Sun's coming my way. Fantastic. That's good news.
Chilly, New Jersey, says Rich. Yeah. Look, I love hearing where people are in the world. I know it sounds absurd, but it's exciting. I still, having been doing this computer and internet and stuff for a while, I still get excited by the fact that you don't have to get on a train or plane and go places. We can all get together online. Germana is in Venezia, and it's drizzling in Venice. Still beautiful, though, I'm sure. Ashley's in sunny Arizona. Susan's joining us from LA. It is early for you. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm very impressed. A break. This is to answer all the questions. Susan's saying a break from tactical HR generalists. Laura's joining us from Budapest, where it's foggy and raining. Jen is interested in knowing more about the date you mentioned, the last week's conference. Yeah, Jen, thanks very much for that. And I did get the flight out. I mentioned this, Tim, last week when I gave this talk at Orlando about, I just put up one slide about this, so thank you for coming along as a result. Atlanta, Georgia, John is. I can't say Atlanta, Georgia, John, without hearing that James Brown song, Night Train, in my head. If you know it, or if you don't know it, check it out on YouTube. Very good. It's raining all over the world. Andrew's in Paris, it's raining. It's cold and grey in Niagara Falls, says Devon. But Nicole says it's sunny in Newmarket, but it is frigid. I love the vocabulary people use when they're describing where they are in the world and what the weather's like. There's always a range of adjectives. Martin's in Manchester, England, and you'll be shocked to hear it is raining. I'm not shocked at all, Martin, as I suspect you knew. It's 32 minutes past. When should we start, Tim? I don't know.
Let's give it two more minutes, Don. Let's start at 34. Right. I'll start at 3:34.
A couple of people coming in from Denver, where, of course, it's snowy, 6 inches of snow, and coolish. Now, I guess, Karen, for you, if it was in London, there was 6 inches of snow, I'd say it's freezing. But for you, in Denver, it's just, coolish, because, we expect it to be like this. Colorado snowing as well, says Sandra. Cloudy and cold in Pageland. Looking forward to hearing about learning and development for leaders and what organizations can implement its importance to stakeholders. Well, there's a wide range of stuff we're going to be covering today, Brittany, and thank you for raising that. We're going to cover a wide range of stuff. We're talking about what makes CLOs, what makes great strategic leadership today. I'm not sure we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of it, but Tim, that does suggest to me that perhaps there's follow-up events here we could do looking at particular aspects of leadership and how we can tackle particular issues, like showing the importance of learning to stakeholders. So, Brittany, thank you for raising that point.
Great idea. All right, Don, I think we can perhaps give you a break from being the weatherman, the global weatherman, reading the weather. I love being the global
meteorologist. I love it. Carry on, Tim.
And I think we'll jump right in. We've got nearly 100 folks on the webinar, so I think that's a great place for us to start. We've got quite a lot of stuff to cover, so I think it makes sense to jump in. So First of all, I just want to say a big thank you to everyone for joining. It's great to see so much interest in this topic, and to see some old friends and familiar names who I noticed who were signing up. So hopefully they've managed to join as well. One quick note on kind of protocol. A significant portion of this webinar, we hope, is going to be discussing and answering your questions. So if you have any questions as we go through the presentation, please drop them in the chat. If it's something that we're in the flow of talking about and it matches, we'll pick it up and we might answer the question right away. But we'll also, at the end of the presentation, we'll reserve a decent amount of time for us to come back to the most common themes and discuss them at the end of the webinar. Okay, so our topic today is the State of Strategic L&D Leadership 2023. That's a rather long and rather grand sounding topic, and it makes me a little bit nervous. I don't know if it makes you nervous, Don, but it makes me a little bit nervous. Because
it does.
It feels like we've set the bar a little bit too high. So generally, I like to set low expectations and have people nicely surprised that this was an hour well spent. So I'm going to say right away that we're not going to provide a definitive statement on the state of strategic L&D in 2023. But what we are going to do is we're going to share with you some of the early results of some research that we've been working on into this topic. And we're going to start a conversation with you all, which we hope will continue over many months about strategic L&D leadership.
Tim, I think that's fair enough. Sorry, Tim, I think that's fair enough. I also think it's fair to say that not enough people are actually, well, I don't know anybody else who's really looking at this in the way that we're looking at it. And so although we may not be able to answer all the questions, we can answer some of them and we can share some light. I do hope that this is a joint venture where we can all go together and learn from each other as we go. Tim, back to you.
Exactly. And in particular today, just to focus on the specific things that we are going to talk about today, we're going to look at, as Don was alluding to earlier in the call, we're going to look at what makes a great learning leader who drives a strategic L&D function. What are their characteristics? What are their capabilities? What are their priorities? So that's really what we're going to focus in on today. Now, before we get too much further along, I think we should do some proper introductions. I'm going to ask Don to introduce himself in a moment. But before he does that, I want to thank Don for working with us on this topic and finding the time to do this webinar today. As we'll discuss in a moment, Don's research really kicked off this whole project, and his thought leadership and other research he's doing on this topic of what makes a great learning leader, I think is the best in the field. A lot of people are talking about this. Don's the really one who's kind of really at the front of all this. So we're very fortunate to have Don on the webinar. So Don, would you like to introduce yourself?
Tim, thank you very much. I will try to live up to that gracious introduction. I am the chairman of the Learning Technologies Conference in London. I have been since the year 2000. I've been in the field of learning and, well, in technology since the early 80s, of training and learning since the mid 80s. And I do three things. I do the Learning Technologies Conference. I do writing, research, and talking around a limited range of topics to do with learning and development and trends in our field. And I also do some work with startups, so a small number of startups, particularly European startups interested in doing new things in our field. I used to chair the Learning and Performance Institute until a couple of years ago. I no longer do. I simply had too much on my plate, and they've got a great leadership team there. They don't need me anymore. Tim, over to you.
Thanks, Don. So yeah, I'll briefly introduce myself and Nomadic a little bit for those who don't know us. I've been involved in enterprise learning for about 20 years. Always on the vendor side. So I've always worked in companies who are working with L&D teams to do various different things in their organizations. I initially started in face-to-face training in China. I actually spent 10 years in China, but for the past 15 years, I've been focused only on digital learning. Initially with a company called 50 Lessons that was sold to Skillsoft. And then I co-founded Nomadic about 10 years ago. And the goal when we set up Nomadic was to develop an approach to digital learning that could tackle strategic topics and drive change and transformation in organizations, and in fact across entire professions. And that's evolved into what we refer to today as digital academies. So we've built digital academies for some of the world's largest organizations to tackle their most important learning and development challenges and transformation challenges. And we're also the platform and content engine behind the Josh Bersin Academy, which I think some of you have probably heard of, and I think some of you are probably members of who have joined the webinar. So as you can see, we've got a very keen interest in this topic, this idea of learning that drives change and transformation in organizations is really what Nomadic's all about. So Kian, could you move us to the next slide? Okay, so what started us on this journey and on this partnership? So it was essentially this chart, which was in Don's most recent global sentiment survey. We look forward to Don's global sentiment survey each year. Don, when's the next one out?
Well, the survey, I'm launching it. I'm launching it next week, and then the results will be out in February of next year.
Okay, February of next year. So this one came out February of last year, and when we saw it, it really spoke to what we see and experience at Nomadic in terms of when we're working with L&D teams, at our clients and our prospective clients. And it really got us thinking. So, if there are these strategic L&D leaders who drive change and transformation at their organization, which Don identifies in this mountain analogy, which I'll get Don to explain in a little bit more detail in a minute. If there are these kind of strategic L&D leaders, what are their characteristics? What makes them stand out? What makes them a strategic leader? And that's really what we're going to try and answer today. But before we get into that, Don, do you want to give a bit more kind of background to this mountain analogy?
Very quick overview, because I put this on LinkedIn and I got a lot of feedback from it. I want to clarify what it says and what it doesn't say. In learning and development, we know that we have the day job. The day job is doing all this stuff on the foothills of this mountain. We have to onboard. We have to do mandatory training. That looks after skills right now. We have to look after skills for the future. We have to change people's behavior so they're better at their job. We have to build capability. Now, all these things are absolutely crucial. They're part of our job. But as you make your way through the foothills and up to the snow line, to the peak, at the peak, you can have this strategic input. You can have a look over the world, and you can have a much greater impact in learning and development. That's where learning leadership lives. But the skills and the knowledge that you develop in delivering great training programs that get you up to the snow line are not the skills and the knowledge that you need to take you beyond the snow line. I'm not saying that doing the job is not important. It's crucial. Without doing all that stuff on the foothills, we're nothing. That's what we're employed for. But if we want to go strategic, we need an additional set of skills. I look at it this way. When you walk up the hill, you've got your boots on, you get to the snow line, your boots won't take you further. You need crampons to get you onto the snow and take you further. In the words of Marshall Goldsmith, what got you here up to the snow line won't get you there to the summit. What got you here won't get you there. So all of that stuff that we do as part of our day job of doing our work in learning and development is necessary, but not sufficient to be a great learning leader. To be a great learning leader, you need extra stuff as well. What is it? Well, that's what we're here to find out. Tim.
Great. Thanks, Don. Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to point out that, whatever we say now and we talk, we're going to focus on those folks or the characteristics of those folks who have made it to the top of this kind of mountain analogy, who are these kind of strategic learning leaders. That's not to disparage anything about all the other learning functions and important learning things that people do in their learning team. So I think it's a really good point to make. So Don, when we saw this, we came to Don and we said, you've identified something really interesting, that there's these top of the mountain L&D professionals, or there's this role at the top of the mountain for the L&D professional. And what we'd like to do is figure out what are the characteristics of learning leaders who are at the top of the mountain. And if we can codify that, if we're able to really identify what are their characteristics, what are their capabilities, what are their priorities, perhaps we can help more learning professionals reach the summit of the mountain, to stretch the analogy. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do here. We're starting with this research into what are the capabilities of strategic L&D leaders, but ultimately what we want this to lead to is development opportunities for learning professionals so they can develop themselves as strategic L&D leaders. We can't say too much about that yet, but that's what this is ultimately all leading towards.
Well, Tim, I put this on LinkedIn 10 months ago. One of the overwhelming responses I got was, Don, I get it. I need to go further, but how? Where do I go next? And that really stimulated me to realize that people are looking for advice on how they can develop those larger strategic skills.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, Kian, if we can move to the next slide. So that's what kicked everything off. And then we started this kind of 4-step process to kind of define the hypotheses around what we think makes a great learning leader, a strategic learning leader. The first step was to really reach out to our networks, Don's network, Nomadic's network, to those learning leaders that we felt were already driving change and transformation in their organizations. And we felt embodied the kind of learning leader that we're trying to codify. Then once we'd kind of reached out to that network, in order to really learn more about them, we set up a focus group to learn about their mindset, their knowledge, their skills, their behavior, that really defined them as learning leaders and leaders in the field of learning. From that focus group, we then drew up a list of hypotheses about what makes a strategic learning leader. And that became the foundation of the survey. We actually identified 10 hypotheses. We're only going to look at 3 of those today, but when we publish the research, which we're going to do early next year, obviously we'll provide the outcomes for all 10 of those different hypotheses.
By the way, it's worth noticing. It's worth noticing, isn't it, that there will be the results will be out in that report at the end of sorry, not the end of this year, in early next year. We're saying
early next year. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We'll touch on that at the end as well. So then from that, we came up with these 10 hypotheses from that focus group, and then we crafted a survey around those hypotheses, and we distributed the survey through our channels. So just to touch a little bit on the demographics, we reached a total of, or we got back a total of 164 completed surveys. It was a very long survey with 23 questions, which had some open-ended questions too. So we were pleased to get that kind of response. We got responses from people working across a huge variety of industries, pretty much every industry, all sizes of business too, from very small businesses to very, very large global enterprises, and from individuals at different levels of the job. Geographically, we got a lot of responses from EMEA, North America, and APAC. Unfortunately, we didn't get much from Latin America, and that's something we're looking to address in future research that we do. So that were the steps in the process, and that brought us to kind of some of this early findings that we're going to share with you today. So, Kian, if you move to the next slide, these are the 3 hypotheses about the characteristics of great learning leaders that we're going to focus on today, and Don's going to dig into the details on these. We're going to look at 3 different things. We're going to look at what motivates great learning leaders, what is their motivation. We're going to look at the vision that they articulate with their teams and across their organization, and we're going to look at their background. What is the background that they have? I'm going to read each one of these. While I'm reading each one, just great thing to do would be put your thoughts in the chat for what you think our research will prove about each of these hypotheses. So do you think it's going to be proved correct, it's going to be proved incorrect, or inconclusive? So just share your thoughts as I'm reading each one of these. So the first hypothesis is great learning leaders are motivated by the possibility of creating tangible change in individuals' lives, and even more so by triangulating those changes to organizational purpose. So do we think that's going to be proven, not proven, or inconclusive, or refuted or inconclusive? Second hypothesis is great learning leaders have a clear and ambitious vision for what learning is and does at their organization that keeps their team aligned and gains cross-functional and senior level buy-in. So is that going to be proven or not, or inconclusive? And then our third hypothesis, Kian, if you just flip to the next page, is that great learning leaders have strong business acumen and business understanding, and that business experience is more important to success than a traditional learning background. Be very interested to see what people think about that one. Okay, so they're the 3 things we're going to answer today, or start to tease the answers of. And I'm going to hand it over to you to Don to dig into some of the.
Thank you. We've got a bunch of responses already to your question about what people think about hypotheses. I think most people think the first one will be proven, but a couple of people, Rachel saying inconclusive, not sure. To the second one, people about the vision, people saying, yeah, proven, but also Marilyn saying inconclusive. Brian saying for the first one, I don't think an external purpose will be motivating. I love this. I love everyone's thinking about it. And look, on three, we've got everything covered. Marilyn says inconclusive. Himanshu says it's definitely true, but John says it's disproven. So we've got all the bases covered. Well, we better find out where we got to on this. Now, Nicole says, can we please define learning? Are you focused solely on the educational component or all aspects of development as well? So it's a fair question. For this, for the purposes of this, what we're going to say is we're talking about adult learning in the workplace directed towards change in performance. Okay, now that definitely includes development. Does it include all aspects of development? Probably not. Does it rely on an educational component? Yes, because people's educational background will affect how well they learn. So we're encompassing all that in the word learning, Nicole. And I appreciate the question. I'm not going to spend any more time on it, but one of the issues we have in learning and development generally is we don't define our terms well enough. So thank you. So Marion says, for that definition, all three are necessary to be a strong learning leader. Okay. Okay. Look, I tell you what, and Connor, yes, we're looking at strictly behavioral based learning. We're not really looking at the about whether people are learning content or they're building their knowledge for the sake of it, although that's definitely part of this, but it's not the sole purpose of it. It's not traditional educational approach. By the way, Tim, I've got to congratulate the whoever's pulled the audience together, because we have a really high quality audience of people who are smart and looking to think about things and challenge as well. So please do keep your thoughts coming. Yeah. I just want to go back very quickly to that. We don't need to move the slides back, but well, no, I'll come to it when we get to the point about vision. I will talk about it, because I think vision is something that's useful and important to talk about, but it's something we can get fixated on, and I really think it's dangerous to get too fixated on vision. It's again necessary, but it's not sufficient. Great. So let's look at the motivation piece to begin with, and please do keep the thoughts coming. I'm loving to see that. By the way, Jen and Marilyn, who were in Florida last week when I spoke about this, we've actually taken some of the numbers out of the presentation so we can concentrate on a more verbal approach to it, but all the numbers will be in the report that comes out early next year. So great learning leaders, let's say, are motivated by the possibility of creating tangible change in individuals' lives. And they want to do it on an organizational level as well. Now, I think this is very, very important for us when we look at what makes a great organizational leader, because I know that individuals coming into the field, whether they fall into it or whether they deliberately come into it, I was one of the people who actually deliberately went into it after graduating. For us, we almost always come in at the individual level, and that's our motivator. Is that enough to be a great chief learning officer? I don't think so. I think to be a chief learning officer, you probably do have to be motivated at the organizational level as well. So what do the stats say about the chief learning officers that we looked at and the people we interviewed? What do they say? Well, for the survey, 60% of respondents said the main reason they'd chosen to pursue their career was making a change in people's lives. The main reason, right? 75% said their outcomes were either intrinsically linked or go hand in hand with the overall business objective. So in other words, this seems to prove that the objective is true. Now, look, Robert said the same hypothesis is also true for leadership in general. I think a lot of what we talk about, Robert, you're right, a lot of what we talk about in terms of what makes a great CLO does apply to great leadership. But I think that one thing that differentiates, and that can be comfort with ambiguity, the ability and the willingness to take risks, and other things which we've identified, which aren't actually in this report today, but which we'll look at in the eventual report. So there's definitely an appetite for risk. There's definitely other things that great CLOs do. They are they're comfortable with ambiguity, and all these things do transfer, as you say, to leadership in general. But I'm not sure that leadership in general has the amount of focus on individual development and actually, frankly, caring about individuals that I don't think that's true for leadership in general in the way it is for people who are involved in learning. So I think there's a lot of these characteristics which are true for good leaders. I think this one, probably the first one here, is a crucial one. And it manifests itself when we look at the transcripts of the focus groups and so on. It manifests itself in quite an emotional reaction and attachment between how people view their world and how they view the change that takes place in people's lives. And actually, we can see that so that's a perfect segue into the next slide. We can see that in one of the quotes from the focus group that we ran. So here's the chief learning officer for a global bank. And it's very interestingly, this person had spent some time in learning, then gone into a bunch of frontline roles, and then come back to being the chief learning officer for this major bank. Having spent the first third of my career in frontline roles, it gave me a really good sense of why we're doing this work. So very focused, this CLO is very focused on the organizational level, but also really seeing the people who benefit most from the learning opportunities and being able to grow in their careers. And this language about opportunity and growing is reflected time and again in these transcripts. It's, as I say, quite emotionally charged. It's not the lip service that is often paid to individual growth that you see in company reports. Our people are our greatest asset, and stuff like that. It's far more deep felt. And talking to and listening to CLOs, this is definitely a part of it. There's more to it than this, though. And when I look at what a chief learning officer does, a great chief learning officer, I think, and we'll have more about this in the report and in subsequent webinars that we do, but I regard a chief learning officer as knowing the what, knowing the why, the who, knowing the where of their organization, but there is also, very importantly, the how. But if we start with the why for the chief learning officer, looking at it from the outside, coming into this bit of research, I thought, like most people here probably, well, the why for a chief learning officer is all about the individual and the organization and meeting their needs. Well, now just we'll pause for a second before we go any further. Himanshu says, aren't all good leaders meant to do that? Grow the careers of their team members. I wish that was true, Himanshu. I really, really wish that was true. Because if it was, then I probably wouldn't have a job running the Learning Technologies Conference. I wouldn't be telling people every day, as I do at the moment, that managers and leaders are crucial in developing people. At the moment, no, I'm afraid they don't. They don't see it as crucial to their job unless they are explicitly told to, typically. So,
and
yes,
I think crucially, Don, as well,
yeah.
Just to add, I think crucially, we're talking about what's your main motivation for following this career. I think that while, yes, it's supposed to be a huge part of a manager or leader's job to develop their people, I don't think for many of them, it's their main motivation for wanting to become a marketing manager or a sales manager or a leader. It's part of it, but it's not the main motivation, which is the difference with people in the learning team, I think.
Thank you for that. Yeah, so it's a fair point. As well as these 2 points of the individual and the individual and the organizational role here. But there's a great point there from Mike. Mike, I can't read that. There's too much there, but I shall read it later on. Thank you. Himanshu, I completely agree with you. Kian, can we pick up Himanshu's point for the Q&A at the end? If you can repeat that, because it will scroll past. If you could possibly record that for the, let's discuss that at the end. I love it. So what Tim says, what are the main motivators? The individual and the organizational. Fair enough. And coming into this research, I thought, well, that's it. But actually, it turns out there are other motivators as well. And I said earlier that there's the why, the how, sorry, the why, the when, the where, and so on. But there's also the how, the character of the CLO. And I think there are other motivators which are quite unexpected. Can we have the next slide, please, Kim? chief learning officer for a major infrastructure company, said this. Now, one of the things I really enjoy about this job is the high level of autonomy. We're allowed to exercise our imagination, try things out. I thought, gosh, I wasn't expecting that at all. And this is a person who I can tell you has a high 10-figure budget, has 600 people reporting to him, and is talking about, and elsewhere in the transcript, is talking about being able to go off and do things which other people at his very high level are not able to do. And I think that this motivator is echoed with other people that I've spoken to, that I've interviewed at the chief learning officer level. If there's a sense here of just getting the job done, being excited about being able to make a difference, and yeah, making things happen. Now, for me, that's a really crucial part of the how of being a CLO. It reflects the character. It reflects a sort of feeling of wanting to seek not permission, but seek forgiveness. In other words, just wanting to get things done until maybe somebody points you back on track. And yeah, curiosity definitely being the key to learning. Lots of good stuff coming through here in the chat.
Let's talk before we move on to the next section. I wonder if I could dive into a question that came up. Well,
of course.
Just for me. So it seems like from our research that the curiosity point and the helping individuals aspect of why you want to be a learning leader, that motivation seems really clear. What I think maybe needs more focus, and I'm less sure about, even though the data there suggests that it's true, is that triangulating that with the business goals and outcomes or org purpose. That seems like the harder part of that. Like the motivation is there to help people, but triangulating that with the organizational purpose and outcomes seems a little harder, but that's really what it's about for a strategic L&D professional, I think. So I was wondering if you see that struggle to translate that desire to help people individually and to positively impact their lives, to triangulate that with business goals and org purpose. And do you think that some learning professionals maybe earlier in their career tend to focus on that comfort zone of helping the individual and maybe not triangulating enough business needs? I've observed that. I haven't seen it in the research, but I've observed it. And I wonder if you'd seen something similar.
We need more research to look at it, but I think, and it would be very interesting to get a view of people with some analysis about how long they've been doing their job. But certainly my experience is that at the beginning, it's all about the individual. And people are thinking less about the organizational culture. As that earlier quote we had showed, when people come out of the L&D function, they go elsewhere in the business, they can absolutely get a real good sense of the organizational imperative and need, or they can do it within the L&D function, absolutely. But without stepping outside that individualistic focus, you can't triangulate against the organizational culture. Himanshu says the desire to help individuals is necessary but not sufficient. We need to have the organizational structure there as well, organizational goals there as well. The autonomy point from this CLO is an agile, Martin says, with agile thinking, which is becoming more and more prevalent. Yeah, it is. And I think, and I may be going beyond the data here, but it absolutely fits all the conversations I've had, that CLOs at heart want to get stuff done. The great ones want to get stuff done, and they're a little bit maverick. Now, I don't mean maverick in a Tom Cruise flying a F-15 way. I just mean they're prepared to do things their own way and get stuff done. And I like that. I think it's something which artful rebels, Nicole. Can I have a T-shirt with that on? I would totally think that should be our motto. Yeah. Let's talk about vision. So we've got these artful rebels. I'm stealing that, Nicole, totally. Now, just to repeat, yes, vision is important. It isn't everything. You don't get to the top of the mountain by having a vision. You've got to slog through the foothills of doing the day job. That's really important. We're not saying that if you get a visionary, bring them in and the little people can carry on doing their jobs. No, they have a clear ambition for what learning is and does at their organization, keeps their team aligned and gains cross-functional and senior level buy-in. And we know this is important. We asked at the beginning, is this proved or not proved by the data? Tim, do you want to say anything before we bring up the slide of the numbers here?
No, I think dive in, Don.
Let's have the numbers. All right. So how well are teams across your organization aligned to the learning strategy and vice versa, right? And what I find fascinating about this is that it seems to me, Tim, to be neither proved nor disproved, people are making progress. I think we wanted to show that things aren't always black and white in being a CLO. So we're making progress with the understanding of our learning plan and its role, but it's not completely embedded. I actually take some comfort from this, because I think if anybody says, yes, it's all totally aligned, I have to take that with a pinch of salt. I'm not entirely sure that it can ever be totally aligned. I think things are always changing. So I think making progress is a more realistic assessment of it. But Tim, this shows to me that there is still a ways to go between, because making progress could cover anything from 5% to 95%. There is a way to go between us talking about learning and truly making it part of, or truly aligning it to organizational strategy.
Yeah, and I think that's the key point. I think like every good CLO, every strategic L&D leader has the intention to articulate a great vision for their learning function, and has the intention that they get senior leadership buy-in for it, and they have the intention that it's going to get cross-functional buy-in. But only one part of that is in your control. You can come up with the vision, but then it takes a lot of stakeholder management, a lot of communication, a lot of bringing the organization along to get that senior leadership buy-in, to get that cross-functional alignment as well, particularly the cross-functional alignment. So I think that makes sense to me that it's in progress, because there's a lot of that you can't control. And somebody said this in the chat further up, it's a lot about organizational culture. You might be a great learning leader that's battling an organizational culture that's resistant or not quite ready for what you want to implement. So I think it makes total sense. And yes, you might be totally aligned across your entire organization. Everyone understands your strategy. You've got senior leadership buy-in, but that might be the lucky few who have that right culture and have that right senior leaders who are really emphasizing have the kinds of senior leaders who are emphasizing the importance of learning. So yeah, I feel it makes a lot of sense when you think about it in that context.
And I'm always reminded of the Californian redwoods. I was very struck going to California and going to these magnificent redwood forests by seeing what a narrow band of elevation they live within. If you go down, I don't know, half a mile down the hill, or presumably up, I only went down, you can see that a redwood seed that is planted in the soil in the right zone will grow to be something that's absolutely enormous, and it will be, I don't know, 30 feet in circumference. But if you go half a mile down, this thing will be no more than a sapling and will never grow to its full potential. And the same is true for people in our field. If they're in the wrong culture, they can't flourish. My advice would be get out and get into a proper culture, because it's easier to move to a new business than it is to try to change the culture of an organization. Great point from Nicole here.
Yeah.
Do you want to say it, Tim?
No, yeah, just the Nicole's point is wonderful. Just think about it in that way, that if you're able to get that buy-in, the senior leadership's view of learning entirely shifts from a cost center to an investment or a center of innovation. So I think that's a very interesting and great way to look at that. Yeah.
And people that I know who've done this are the people who have people knocking on their door saying, I heard you were doing some stuff with Jane down the corridor. I want some of that. They don't say it because of the learning. They do it because of the impact on the business. So it's the people who built those strong relationships with the business who go on to, Himanshu, absolutely. Yes, we have not solved for it. That would suggest there's best practice, which you can implement anywhere. Are there war stories? There absolutely are. And I would love to have, Tim, perhaps you and I can get together, get some case studies together to share where people have done a great job doing that. Yeah. So Himanshu, yes, it's coming. Go on.
One interesting general point to make about that, like on the war stories thing, is that I think, you can't just articulate your vision and expect that you're going to get senior leadership buy-in. You've got to actually go and do something that demonstrates the value of learning to the organization. So yeah, I think they're the kinds of stories. What are the kind of learning initiatives and the kinds of results that you're getting from that learning that shows true value to the organization for learning, then you will get the buy-in. So it's almost like that has to come first before the vision. You have to demonstrate the value to the organization through real initiatives.
Emma says it well, visibility of success must be key. And everybody I know who's done this has done stuff. And it's not the vision that gets people on board. Of course, they have a vision, but it's the action that gets people on board. The visibility, as Emma says, of success. I'm going to have a whole lot of t-shirts made up as a result of the chat from this. It's just fantastic. And important to take the leaders on the journey. Yes, absolutely. Let's keep going because I'm aware that time is flying by and we could keep chatting all day. You know what, Tim? I love doing stuff online. We get people from all over the world and we have these great conversations. We'll also do some stuff face-to-face, I know, where we'll get people together and have a cup of tea or perhaps a cup of coffee or a beer and continue the conversations face-to-face. Great learning leaders, our third hypothesis, have strong business acumen and understanding. Business experience, it's more important to success than traditional learning background. Now, we had a discussion about this in Florida last Monday, and honestly, it was fabulous because I put this to the audience in the sense, which is more important, having great experience in the business or being experienced in learning development? I tell you what, Nicole says the jury's out. Absolutely. Tell you what, you have a strong experience on every side of this. And yeah, the jury is out. But you know what? I came into this thinking it's more important to have, and this is me with 30 years experience plus of doing this, right? It's more important to have business experience than learning experience. Bring people in from the outside, bring in their experience and their understanding, their vision. I want to share with you a couple of quotes that we had from the focus group that made me change my mind. People who were there last week will have seen these before. CLO, global bank, different CLO says, Connie, I'm with you on your quote here. This CLO says, staying forever or many years in learning and development or training can really limit your horizons. And honestly, right, we've got in this focus group, we've got 6 people, we've got 5 people who've come in from the outside and 1 person who's been in learning and development all their working life. And this is like the moment when you think everything's going to stop in the conversation. And then the 1 person who's been in there all their life says this: I will respectfully diverge from my colleagues here. Chilling. I've been in learning development for over 30 years, fell backward. I didn't intend to do it, but the minute I found it, I never left. I fell in love. This is my home. Ooh. Again, you feel the emotion here. It's amazing. Now, she goes on then to very practically, and look, everyone's agreeing. That's fabulous. She goes on to be very clear and say, now look, in those 30 years I've been doing this, I've learned this, I've learned that, I've tackled this problem, I've done the other. And there's lays out all the things she's learned very practically. And then she says this, and I do agree with everybody else in the focus group. You've got to have a business orientation. You've got to have a network. And this is where, this is just a transcript, but it reads like a script. It's so well structured. You've got to have a business orientation. You've got to have a network. You've got to understand the business. You've got to understand the leaders of the business. It is a great quote, Kinga. And it's so powerful. And this is just someone speaking passionately about how they've come to understand their work. And this is where I transformed my understanding of this. And I would go along with Connie in the quote, in the chat, who said, was it Connie, who said, you've got to have both. Only one won't work. And I think that's where we got to with this, that if you've got people in L&D who can get that wider business experience, fabulous. If you've got people coming from the outside who can develop the passion that we see here, the understanding of learning, and they can learn the learning stuff, which is increasingly important, well, there we are. But you've got to have both.
Yeah, just a couple of points there, Don, as well. I think I know the person behind this cloak very well. She's one of our best clients in Nomadic. She is one of the best CLOs I know. She's amazing. She's absolutely incredible. And the thing that stands out for me about her is what she says in that. She loves it. She's passionate about it. And I think that can overcome many things. If you don't have business background, and that passion drives her to make sure she does the absolute best job she can, which means understanding her business leaders, understanding what they need. So that passion and love for learning that she has kind of overcomes any other obstacles, or any drawbacks she might have from only being in learning for 30 years. So yeah.
By the way, I'm loving the amount of commentary we're getting here, which suggests that people are, you're on board here. You get it. You've thought about this and you feel it as well. Gosh, Right. What's our next slide? And what does it prove to us?
This is just the data.
This is the backgrounds that people had. So it was very interesting. We had people who'd spent their time most in L&D or most in HR. There was probably half of it, and a mixture of other backgrounds. Personally, I've spent all my time in L&D one way or the other, but in that, I have done a bunch of things like setting up and selling businesses and running publishing enterprises and so on, all of which are L&D, but have taught me an awful lot. By the way, the best thing you can do is try to run a business and fail, and that is a great learning experience. Doesn't feel like it at the time. One interesting thing that came out of this is the effect of the size of an organization on people's business acumen. So I'd like to have a look at that very quickly with the next slide. The learning leaders in mid-sized firms seemed even less likely to have a broad business background and knowledge. Now, again, I wasn't expecting this. In the other two sectors, from either small or large firms, well, the people saying they were experts in what the business did were much higher. But in the mid-sized firms, it was smaller. Now, we can hypothesize as to why this would be. My guess is that medium-sized firms have grown beyond their capacity to grow the people in the L&D function. So people have come in and they've dealt with what it's done as a small company. It's grown, but the people in the L&D function probably haven't developed their skills as the company has grown. In large organizations, and of course in our focus group, we were just talking to very large organizations, they have the capacity to get people learning explicitly or implicitly about the business. You can rotate people, you can explicitly train them on it. But in this medium-sized organization, that doesn't happen. Look, Connie's got a great answer there. I was working in a 30,000 people in company that it really allowed me to gain business acumen and credibility. Great point, Connie. And I think that unfortunately, and in a smaller business, well, you see it happening around you, but in the middle, yeah, I just think it's kind of difficult to catch that. But this is me trying to interpret the number. Tim, do you agree? Do you disagree?
Yeah, we don't have any more data to really say why this is, but similar to what you're saying, are slightly different. But one thing that struck me is, I think when you get to that mid-size, which I think was 500 employees or more in the survey, below that, you probably don't have an L&D specialist. It's probably
right.
under HR generalist, and it might be your first learning specialist that you hire into that middle org. And that you might hire them for the most immediate and pressing need, which is often a compliance or a regulatory need. When you're growing quickly, you've got 500, you've got to make sure that you're doing your health and safety, your sexual harassment, your data security type training, and you might hire your first L&D specialist as someone who can just make sure you're not going to get into trouble. And I think that might feed into that kind of sense that they're not strategic. They don't have that view of the business like in a very large organization, but in a small organization, it's typically not a kind of HR specialist either. So I think, and it's something that, again, there isn't much research on it yet, but it's an interesting thing for mid-sized companies to think about when they start hiring their first specialist L&D. Are they hiring someone for that immediate need right now, that immediate kind of pressing regulatory need? Or are they also keeping in mind the kind of strategic need? Because if you set that kind of expectation that that's what learning for, it can be very hard to change that in the future, which is what we see as well. But that's a lot of speculation. It's hard to say how true that is.
Makes sense though. Let's go on to just look at the trends and patterns, and then let's have some Q&A, because I appreciate that we're close to the end here. I could agree, Jen says. All these organizations. Writing business cases and growing cross-functional relationships have been pivotal in my learning perspective, Jen says. Before we move on, I just want to draw attention to one word in Jen's quote there, or her comment. It's the word relationships. And I don't think in L&D talk enough about relationships. And admittedly, I'm nearly 60. It's taken me a bit of time to catch up with reality and see how important that is. But relationships are really what makes or breaks a good L&D function. It's the relationship between the person at the top and the people they have to persuade, and throughout the L&D function with all the people they're in contact with. The relationship means an obligation on both sides. And it could be a weak one, it's a loose tie relationship, or it could be quite a strong one. And you have to have both weak ties and strong close ties in your relationships in order to run a successful function. that is a whole webinar by itself. But Jen, I just wanted to thank you for bringing up that point. I really like your story and bring up the word relationships. Let's look at our 4 trends and patterns that we've identified from here. Firstly, I think sorry, I've got to say, Heather, there's a big difference between networks and relationships. I love that. That's going on a t-shirt as well. Yeah, everyone can be persuaded they've got friends in their network, but no, your relationships are where the people who count and who are going to look after you and who you have to look after will be found. Thank you. CLOs are thinking and acting like other C-suite executives. The really good ones, they absolutely are. And we had that point earlier. Many of the characteristics we're talking about are shared by other people at the highest level. The function is undoubtedly evolving to become more consultative, and people are building relationships with the business based on a combination of vision, yes, but also on practical success, which enables them to become consultative. Business acumen is critical, even if a business background is not. So that reflects that point we were just talking about. You can be an L&D, provided you build your acumen, you're okay. And if you're coming from the outside, as I think Rich said, make sure that you learn from the L&D people and make sure you're humble enough to learn from the L&D people. And CLOs are motivated by intrinsic curiosity, helping others, and of course, by meeting organizational goals as well. So those are our four key trends that we're taking away, but there'll be more coming out in the report, which will be coming out at the beginning part of next year. Tim, this is where I wrap up and we hand over to Q&A. Is that right?
Yeah, actually, I mean, I think we could just stay on those summaries for a couple of minutes. Just a couple of follow-up questions. And then I think because we've been answering questions as we've gone along, there may be some other ones, but I think we've done a pretty good job of jumping in and out of the questions. But I'd like to just dig into the first one a little bit, Don, because I think people can question that. So, you know, CLOs are thinking and acting like other C-suite executives. What fundamentally do you think that means? What is it? What is the key thing that makes a CLO think and act like other C-suite executives?
For what I've seen is it's the focus on activity which is focused on organizational benefit. So it is here, our initial why, the initial motivational piece is focused on what the organization will benefit from. And I think for me, that's a crucial thing, which is different from heads of development or training who are there in order to deliver a supporting fulfillment function, if that makes sense, Tim.
Yeah. No, very simple. You know, I think to put it simply as possible, I think it means they're thinking about the business need first and about kind of learning second, how learning fits that business need.
Yes.
So I think it's about the business first is really the key difference there. So yeah, exactly. Seeing the big picture, as Nicole said there. Just one other bit on the background thing. You know, we're seeing that business acumen is very important, even if business background isn't. I wonder how you think folks can gain, and I think a lot of people have had ideas in the chat, but how you think folks can gain that deep business knowledge without going into a kind of more business role. And do you think that perhaps it depends a little on the industry if this is true? You know, if you're in a more technical industry, maybe pharma, maybe a very technical industry, is it more important to have some of that business background? I'd love to know what the attendees think.
I was talking to somebody who, CLOs in the C-suite, Nicole says, care more for their agenda, people development, and understand all the levers that enable business success. I like that. Looking at how people get that knowledge, I was in a conversation with somebody who was quite high up in the insurance business, which is very complicated, very technical. And I said to him, so look, how he was talking about sitting down, having conversations with people about what their problems were and how they could help them with the need to develop actuarial skills and so on. I was slightly amazed by the depth of his knowledge about insurance. I said to him, how on earth have you developed all that knowledge and all those skills? And he said, I just asked people. Now, it takes a certain amount of guts to go and say to people, can you just explain to me this balance sheet or the actuarial principles behind when we deliver, when we provide and when we don't provide insurance? But nonetheless, he does that. And he explained that most people, when you go and ask them for help, provided you make it very clearly defined and limited, and you don't keep knocking on the door, are very happy to offer it. And this is a very senior level person talking to other very senior level person who are just sitting down and saying, and talking him through stuff, and very quickly getting a good level view of what it meant to be in an insurance business. There we are. There are a couple of questions here that are coming through. Oh, really interesting from Jen. I didn't realize the insurance industry has a culture for communicating, but thank you for sharing that. I'm in tech now and I feel that isn't there. Well, I've worked in tech quite a lot, Jen. I'd agree with you about that. I'm not sure about, I don't know about the insurance industry. Tim, we've got 5 minutes left to go. We've got a couple of questions which I think we should be handling. Could we pick up on them? Kurt said, what organizations or academic institutions are providing progressive, leading edge programs of development for the skills and competencies of the CLO you're describing? And Trekker said, yes, that was my comment. So do we have anything to share about that, Tim?
I honestly don't know. I think I'd love to hear if anyone has other thoughts in the chat, but I'm not aware of anyone that's doing anything particularly different that's addressing this challenge. Yes, I mean, I think there are some more well-known CLO programs, business school programs, but I'm not sure of anyone who's that are leading edge and that are kind of addressing these competencies that we are describing. That doesn't mean there aren't out there. I'm not.
Tim, we should be clear. There are academic institutions which do stuff. Yeah. So there's a university in Spain that does it. Wharton does it. Middlesex University, where I have an honorary doctorate, do it. But these are all doctoral programs I'm talking about.
Yeah. And I'm saying, specifically the competencies we describe in that's not something I know those programs cover.
No, they don't.
Not that they don't exist. I do see a lot of things emerging more at the other end, actually. Don and I have been coming across recently quite a lot of interesting learning platforms that are trying to educate learning leaders, not necessarily learning leaders, more junior people into the learning profession and give them some of that background. But again, I'm really seeing the two ends of the spectrum. There's the academic programs and then these kind of smaller, self-paced courses around this kind of topic, and not necessarily addressing the specific topics we're focused on. So, but doesn't mean they don't exist. It means
a couple of useful ideas coming into the chat there, which I wasn't aware of. So thank you for sharing those. Any other thoughts? Please share them. I'm just looking at the chat thoughts from the past other questions which came through that we haven't necessarily dealt with. I like Marilyn's point about the need to build a bridge from business to performance, understanding what the need is, and then understanding the best solution, which may be learning or may not be, is crucial. Looking back through the questions we've got coming through, I think Uli made a really good point. Great leaders in learning also need to know how relevant communication works. It's not enough simply to know the stuff. The communication piece is crucial. I believe the difference as the learning leader defines and drives the learning strategy, says Marilyn. All leaders are responsible for executing and implementing the strategy. That's fair.
There's a couple of great comments as well. One from Rich about the challenge a lot of the time is getting the resources to build initiatives to get more buy-in. And it can feel like a bit of a catch-22 sometimes, that you've got to, you need the resources to build the initiatives so you can prove the value. But getting those resources, you need that proof. So it can feel very difficult sometimes. I really appreciate that, Rich. I think that's very accurate. And I think Rachel's comment, I believe having the credibility of other CXOs is critical. Like it or not, that's so often how you get a seat at the table. I think that's very true too. You need the respect of your peers to really get that seat at the table. So yeah, I think that's a great comment too.
Tim, we have 2 minutes left. How do people get hold of the report? What else should they do?
Yes, we're going to put up a landing page. Kian, I think you might have a link, hopefully, to the landing page where people can register their interest in the report. So if you're interested in receiving this report in when we publish it in early 2023, make sure you register on that landing page. And yes, I think, can we save the chat comments? Very rich discussion here. I think that is a fantastic idea. So actually, Kian's just mentioned there, he's going to email everyone with a link to the landing page where you can sign up so you will automatically get sent the report next year. But look out for it too. It's in our newsletter. We'll be publishing it early next year, and we'll make sure everybody knows about it. But yes, we will download this comment thread because it has been fantastic. Thank you everyone for such active participation. You made this a very rich event. So thank you very, very much. It's been really good to have everyone's participation while Don and I have been chatting away.
Cool. Look, I want to say thank you very much. Please send the chat, says Rachel. Yeah, I enjoyed it. I love sharing time with smart people in our field, and you've really made this a great afternoon for me. And I hope that wherever you are in the world, it's been valuable for you. And the pull quotes, Alice, thank you, Alicia. Sorry. You know, I find that reading the transcript of a focus group or a call is amazing, because you think you know it first time round, you read it the second time, the third time, the pull quotes that you missed the first time really hit you, and you think, gosh, yes, I'm so glad we got the transcript for that. Thank you. Yeah, don't worry. We'll make sure we get this chat copied, and Kian will make sure it's available to people. Time for me to wrap up. Tim, thank you so much for the opportunity. I've really enjoyed working together. Looking forward to doing more stuff together with Nomadic in the future.
Thanks, Don. It's been great working with you. And yeah, everyone look out for the report and more on this next year. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you very much.